Ever wonder why live musicians pass over your compositions? Well, after examining hundreds of scores and parts sent in by my subscribers, I'm going to show you exactly how to fix your notation step by step, which will enable you to make your music that more professional for live musicians to read and want to play. All right, so for this edition, we're going to go over orchestral score. So this is submission number 1, which involves a piece for woodwinds and strings. As you'll see, there's no brass. So the very first thing that we want to see is the score order. So right here we have score order. We have piccolos, flutes, oboes, bassoons, clarinets. Now, the number one thing that I can see right off the bat here is that in terms of score order, we want to make sure that, yes, flutes are at the top, but then we want oboes, which is correct. But after the oboes, we need to have clarinets. So the correct score order would be piccolos, flutes, oboes, clarinets, including the bass clarinet, by the way, and then the bassoons. That's the proper score order right there. The other thing that I'm noticing off the bat as well is that there's an inconsistency in terms of the bracketing. Now, this is not the biggest thing in the world, but if you're going to write an orchestral score, you want to make sure that the legibility is 100% there. That's the thing that we want to make sure that we do here. And by the way, if you're wondering what are the things I'm looking for exactly when taking a look at the score, I do have a free engraving checklist down in the description below that you can download and use for yourself. If we zoom out a bit more here, you'll notice that this score is in landscape. Landscape is not really a format that we use with orchestral scores. Usually an orchestral score is going to be the other way around. It's going to be in a tabloid size. And if you're in Europe, I think it's A3, which is basically a large vertical size paper. In the United States, it's 11 inches by 17 inches. Okay. Here it looks like this particular composer did it the other way around, which is not what we want to do in an orchestral score. It's always going to be vertical. Okay. Again, this is the first page. I'm not even looking at the other pages here. Your first page is what creates the impression, especially the first page of music. Okay. I look at the very top here and it says quarter equals 73. Now, quarter equals 73 is not really a real metronome marking, okay? Let me explain what I mean by that. So when we deal with live performers in a concert music scenario, generally speaking, we want to stick close to what the actual metronome says. So if you take a look at this metronome right here, you'll notice it has a bunch of numbers all around it. And the numbers go basically in notches. So if we start from around 72 here, you'll notice that 72, the next notch above is 76, okay? We want to actually stay true to that because the difference between 72 and 76 is not really that big, right? So to go back to this PDF here and seeing 73, we might as well just use 72 because that's the exact metronome marking that we see on a standard metronome, okay? Now, I got to pull back a little bit and actually explain to you why this is in my head. The reason is that when I did my interview at Juilliard, I believe it was the second time for my master's degree, I had a metronome marking that looked just like this. And the professor there, the late Christopher Rouse, he actually took a look at my score, and the very first thing he pointed out was the metronome marking, which I thought was interesting because, that was what pointed out something that was kind of novice of me to do. So nowadays, when I look at scores, that's usually the first thing I look at because of that encounter with Professor Rouse. So that's something that I just want to point out with you here as well. So just change that to quarter equals 72 and you'll be good to go there. So there's a couple of things there. The next major thing that I want to point you towards here is when you're writing an orchestral work, especially these days where rehearsal time is very, very short. For the piece that I wrote for the Los Angeles Philharmonic, it was crazy. I only had 66 minutes to get my 10-minute kind of huge gargantuan piece rolling. It was really not much time at all. So we want to make it as easy as possible for the musicians to play, even if the music is complex. Now here the music is not very complex, so it should be okay. But one thing that's making this music more complex than it needs to be, perhaps, is the key signature. So if you take a look at this key signature, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sharps, right? And it looks like it's in the key of, G sharp minor, I believe it is, right? There's no real reason to have it in G sharp minor. You can have it easily in G minor or even A minor. All you have to do is just move up everybody up a half step or down a half step, and you will get the same result. The other thing too is when you're thinking about strings, their best, most resonant form is when they're playing open strings. So on the violin, that's going to be your G natural, your D natural, your A natural, your E natural. So if you're playing in a key that has 5 sharps like this, Look what happens to G. Now you have to play G sharp. Look what happens to D. Now you have to play D sharp. Look what happens to A in this scenario. You got to play A sharp. The E is still a regular E here. Yes, so we didn't get to E sharp yet, but you see what I mean now. We can't use the open strings. We can't make the music that much more resonant. And really with strings, 9 times out of 10, we would prefer to have that open sound, especially in the orchestra. There are some cases, of course, where you don't want that, but it's better, I think, in my view, to keep it open, to explore those open strings in your orchestral work. Okay, so that's going to be just some things here for submission number 1. All right, so here's another submission for orchestra. And at first glance, it's hard to see what the errors are in the engraving here, but let's take a closer look here. So again, here we have a very good vertical layout. It looks like an A3 11x17 tabloid kind of situation. So that's exactly what we want to see. Let's take a look top down. So I'm always looking top down, by the way, when I'm looking at these things. So you have the title, you have the composer name. That's all looking really good. We have Andante con Passione, which is the tempo marking. These days, I like to put the actual tempo marking here as well because, you know, Mahler and Brahms and Strauss and all those people, they can kind of get away with that, without having tempo markings because there's a tradition of tempo markings taken by conductors and ensembles and so on. But for new music, even if it's done in a tonal, traditional, conservative context, we really want to have that tempo marking there. So that would be the one addition I would make there. In terms of score order, looks really good. Flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons, that's exactly how we want it. The way this composer put the brackets here is exactly the way that we want it. It looks really, really, really clean. And if I'm looking at the woodwind parts in general, it looks quite good actually on first glance. One thing that I would note when you're double checking your legibility on these scores is take a look at this bar right here. This is a glaring issue. So we're in the time signature of 4/4. Okay. Now in 4/4, you generally want to make sure that if you have music on beats 3 and 4, like this composer has here, you want to make sure that these two rests here are combined into a half rest. So we don't need to have 2 quarter rests there. It's much clearer and much more professional looking if we have a half rest right here. Okay. So that's number 1. There's another thing in this bar, maybe you can spot it, in terms of simplification of this sextuplet. Okay, I'll give you a second to look at it. Okay, you got your second. This sextuplet really is just 2 triplets. So we could have G, F sharp, F natural, and then this is F, D, B flat. We have 2 sets of triplets next to each other. That would be a lot clearer and easier to read because right now I see 6 notes over the span of 2 beats, which is a lot, just more computation in the mind of the performer to handle. But if they see 2 triplets, one triplet on one beat, another triplet on another beat, that's way easier to comprehend and will get you the same exact result. So my whole mindset when I'm engraving music, especially for the intention of live performance, is I want to make sure that whatever I'm writing is the easiest version that I could have on that page for the musician to play. Because at the end of the day, what we want to do is make sure that our music can be performed and rehearsed in the shortest amount of time possible. That's really the goal at this stage of the process, okay? And before we continue on, make sure to download my free engraving checklist in the description below. It's going to show you exactly how I'm looking at these scores step by step. Now, again, these days, I would highly recommend not doing a transpose score, especially for orchestral music. In wind ensemble music, it's pretty common to use transpose scores, but nowadays with new orchestral music, even if it's in a traditional tonal style, it's better to just have it without any key signature at all and just put the accidentals in the music. You will thank yourself later when you do this. All right, moving down here, everything else looks pretty good. Now, horns 1 and 3, horns 2 and 4, this is really well done. Typically speaking, we want to have 1 and 3 and 2 and 4 right after each other, so this is really well done here. The only extra thing I would add here for this composer is we want to make it really crystal clear who's playing this line in horns 1 and 3. This is an often overlooked thing actually, and that is when you have 2 instruments on one staff, we want to make sure that we know who's playing what. So for this phrase right here and this phrase right here, what I would write is the text A space 2, A space 2, right above the text, right above the staff here rather, a due, A space 2. That way we know that horns 1 and 3 are playing this line. And I would put that again here in parentheses, a due. Okay, otherwise we're not 100% clear. Is this just horn 1 playing? Is it like a solo line for horn 1? Or is horn 1 and 3 playing? And if you put a due, A space 2, it will make it crystal clear. Same thing goes with horns 2 and 4. Here you didn't have to do that on the clarinets, right? Because they're separated, clarinet 1, clarinet 2. You didn't have to do any of that kind of stuff. But here you have to do that because they're both playing the same line. We need to know if both of them are playing it. It will make it that much easier in rehearsal. That looks pretty good. Trumpets look great. Going down to the trombones, also looking pretty good. So I have no problems with this at all in terms of the notation and so on. Okay. Tuba. So again, you got to go down the staff lines and do this kind of analysis if you want your music to be completely legible here. Now, I do spot something right here in the tuba. I don't know if you can spot it. So he's got a DD here with the crescendo. It's really good that this composer put a tie over to the D in beat 3. That's really great because that shows beat 3 in the 4/4. But this crescendo into the rest leaves a lot to be desired. What are we crescendoing to? Are we crescendoing to mezzo forte? Are we crescendoing to forte? It's not clear. We really need to have a dynamic marking here. What this composer did here, though, is perfect. We have a starting dynamic and an ending dynamic. And a lot of times I see in a lot of my students' music is that they do write a lot of dynamics, but we forget the starting and or the ending dynamic. Really important that we have both of these within the system here. All right, so let's move on to submission number 3. This is another piece for full orchestra. And again, you'll start to see a pattern here that at the very top here we have quarter equals 75. We know by now that this should probably be 72 or more likely 76. Let's take a look at the score order. Piccolo, flutes, oboes, English horn, clarinets, bassoons. That's perfect. Horns, trumpets, trombones, tuba. Okay. Then we have our percussion, harp, and strings. So the score order makes a lot of sense there. Just from an aesthetic point of view, and again, a lot of this is first impression, right? It's really important that we make a good first impression on our musicians, our conductor, and maybe if you're submitting this to a call for scores, first impression, it makes a big deal. So if I'm looking at this, right, the first thing that I'm thinking of right off the bat is, wow, all the stabs are really tightly compressed, okay? And it makes it look really cramped. So that would be the first thing that I would do, is I would decide for myself, how am I gonna make this look less cramped, especially on this first page, because this is the page that everybody's gonna see, okay? And this is really what we should be spending most of our time on if the goal is to get the piece played. So if I take a look at this, there's a few ways that I can just think really easily to make this happen. And one of the ways is to combine staffs. So for example, if you look at flute 1 and flute 2, you can easily combine these two staffs into one staff and just call it flute 1 and flute 2. So you put flute 1, 2 on one staff, and then guess what? Your second staff is completely eliminated. Same thing with the oboes. Oboe 1, 2 on the same staff, okay? English horn, I would keep it on the same staff here. Clarinets, again, you can have all this music on one staff. You don't need to have it on two separate staffs. Same with the bassoons. And we can just keep going all the way through the rest of the brass. And this will save you so much space on the page, because now when you look at it, it's so much easier for the conductor, especially, to see what's going on. Because right now, it's just a lot of goose eggs, a lot of whole notes. And if we saw these whole notes on the same staff, it would be easier to see in a smaller amount of music what is going on exactly. Now, this particular piece is not like overly complex, especially this first page, so that's not going to be the big factor here, but it does make a difference, I promise you, on a first impression, to see especially that first page to look as professional as possible. And like the other pieces, again, key signature, we don't really need it in a new piece of music, but this composer, I think, did a great job here in choosing the key signature because it's quite an easy key signature here, right? It's just one flat for the most part here. So that we could live with, okay? Now, one last factor I want to point out in this particular score are the strings themselves. So this composer has the strings in the correct order, that's fine. But the one major thing I see that could be fixed here is this tremolo figure. So with strings, what we want to see with tremolo, in other words, this effect here, playing on with the bow really quickly on the strings, is that we want to see the notation that looks like 3 lines on top of the tremolo, or rather on top of the pitch. Because if we have this pitch C and it says the word tremolo, it's not immediately graspable to the performer or even the conductor what's going on here. So instead of writing the word tremolo, we really want to see that visual representation of the pitch with the 3 lines. So putting 3 lines on top of the C, we would have to do it again on top of this C, and all of these pitches would have these 3 lines on top. So every time it says tremolo here, this composer should be putting these 3 lines here. Now, the next question becomes, do you need the ties? I've seen some composers put the ties. I've seen some composers not put the ties. I myself have sometimes put the ties. I myself have sometimes not put the ties. I don't think that part of it is a big difference in the grand scheme of things, but the idea of putting these 3 lines, the tremolo lines, I think is the really, really big thing that we need to be doing here in terms of making this as legible as possible for the conductor and the musicians. Now, if you want to get your music to a state where it can be performed and commissioned on a more regular basis, I have a video right here that will show you exactly how to do it.